Good afternoon, Brisbane. How are you?
Good. Awesome.
Yeah, you good? Well, thanks for hanging in there with me. I made it in from Melbourne. I'm doing the YOW tour, and Brownwood was nice enough to invite me here, so I really appreciate it. This is an experience report. I've been teaching children to program for 10 years, and I've learned some things that I want to share, some things that worked and some things that didn't work. And this is really just my perspective, and I hope that you find it useful. In addition to this work, I am an independent cloud architect, and that's my primary job. So I create big data solutions. I'm actually doing some work with CSIRO here in Australia. That's why I'm here for YOW. I'll kind of talk about that at the end. So this has been a passion project and a labor of love. So I always like to start with success, because there's a lot of challenges in this world. So success is one person at a time. And you can tell I'm emotional about this. So Genevieve was someone I met when she was 16 years old, and she had never programmed in her life. And I taught her to program, and she's now 23. She's got a degree in comp sci and biology, and her first job was at Pivotal Labs in the United States with a 6-figure salary. So it can be done. It can be done. We just want to have more like this, basically. And in addition to having this success, she's also been a teacher since she was 17 of teaching kids programming. She, however, is still unfortunately the exception. So another story is my story. People often ask me, why do you do this? I really don't get paid for it. I spend about 25% of my professional time. The reason I do it is because I have the life that I have now because of education. Not so much technical education, but basic education, some other types of education. I'm actually by training a linguist. I'm a self-taught programmer. I did not start programming until I was 38 years old. So I'm from the middle of the United States, and for most people outside the U.S., kind of think of West Coast, East Coast. I'm from a place called West Fargo, North Dakota. My parents were farmers. I'm the first person in my family to go to university at all. And it's kind of a remarkable thing that I did, because I come from a very traditional area, and when I was growing up, I inquired about what kind of career I might have, and I asked my teachers, and this is the response I got. Particularly, this was the response I got from my math teacher. And then I went and asked other teachers, and basically I stopped my math education for a period of time at about 13. I resumed it when Khan Academy came out. It's kind of maybe another story, but I always like to tell this. I learned calculus when I was 51, and I'm continuing to learn advanced calculus, and it's very, very important for my job. So anyway, continual lifelong learning. But I did have an interruption that caused me to not do comp sci and things like that because of this challenge. So I'm apparently not the only one, because I live in California, and I'm in the heart of the tech world, and we really have a lot of problems. This is a Google conference that I literally took the picture, and I was actually, I'm a pretty tough gal, but I was actually scared. I looked around, and it was confined, and there were thousands of people, and I was really, if you look closely, there's one other woman. This is at a Google I/O. There's literally just thousands and thousands of people, and there were 2 women, and two. So you think, okay, that's Silicon Valley, it's kind of a weird place. This is reInvent 2 years ago in Vegas, and really they just have more now. This was when they had 20,000 people, that now they have 50,000 people. And it's just really a challenge. We really have a lot of work to do to be more inclusive. This was a party in LA. I didn't attend the party. I took the picture and then I left because I felt really uncomfortable. And this is another event in Google. So it's just a really commonality in many places in the world. Not all, but many, too many. So, because it's the end of the day, I like to give you the conclusion. So we're going to rewind from the conclusion. My 10-year conclusion is, of all the things that we can do, the most important thing that me and my group has been doing is creating courseware and training middle school, which is grade 5, 6, 7, and 8 teachers. That's the thing that we've learned over the 10 years of working together, that we can make the most impact. We can have the greater number of Genevieves. So training middle school teachers, how do we as developers do that? What do we do? Well, we want to start thinking of, when do we start programming? when oftentimes people start with their own children or friends' children to learn how to be teachers. This is my daughter, and I started working with her when she was about 5 or 6 years old, and she's now 19, and she's in university, and she's taking bioinformatics and comp sci, thank God. And she was writing her essays, and she said the things that she remembered in terms of learning programming were around literally sitting on my lap. And I gave her a kid's keyboard, a multicolored keyboard, and actually didn't have it plugged into a monitor, I have to tell you. But she thought she was programming. So she got comfortable with the idea of it. And then we started with visual programming, and then we moved into and co-created what is the core of TKP. So computational thinking starts when kids start school. And I have resources around it, even though we're going to focus on middle school in this talk. So start with your own children if you haven't already. So I used to work at Microsoft from 2007 through 2011. I was a developer evangelist. I, in fact, was in Gold Coast, and I keynoted at a tech ed many years ago, and brought my daughter. And when I joined Microsoft from being an independent, I made as a condition of my employment that 25% of my time would be devoted to working on this woman in tech problem. So Microsoft has a program called DigiGirls. And what I did is I took leadership for Southern California, and I found, and this was a group of developers, just happened to be all women, there was no courseware. So the first thing is to create courseware. And the best way to create courseware is to work with children. There is now, 10 years later, some good courseware out there. Notably in the US, code.org has some really good courseware, and there's a lot of pockets around the world. There's probably some efforts here. When I started 10 years ago, there was nothing. Literally, when I went to a DigiGirls event, it was in Fargo, North Dakota, they were teaching Great Plains accounting software to the girls, like programming the API. It was horrible. It was like the most horrible nightmare thing. So we started with sitting down with my daughter going, what's fun? Now we started with a language at Microsoft called Small Basic, which is still a fantastic little project. The guy who made it left. It's a re-implementation of Logo, which is the turtle. It's a simplified language. And we got reasonably far. But we found a significant limitation in doing events. You bring the kids in, whether it's all girls or girls and boys or whatever, you teach them, they're excited, their parents are maybe developers, and then what? So one of the challenges, and a lot of people don't say this, is while doing events has a place, the greater work needs to be done in the schools, because a single day event isn't going to change those pictures that I showed you in the beginning. So we then, when I left Microsoft, looked at what the teachers needed. We talked to the teachers. And in the US, if there is any programming language at high school, it's Java. And they said, we have these block-based languages for kids, Scratch and Squeak and things like that, and we have some Java. But in the middle school, we have nothing. So we did some research, and we had kind of started with this because there's a lot of turtle out there. Probably some of you guys have seen it, and I'll be showing it in a minute. But actually, this is not new at all. The guy who made Mindstorm, Seymour Papert, and a number of other people were involved in this idea of creating a language that gives immediate visual feedback to teach children. So one of the things that we don't do well enough in our industry in general, but particularly around education, is we don't look at our history. And if any of you are interested in this domain, I highly recommend you start with this book. And I have a gist on GitHub with a list of all the resources and papers, because we really need to build on people who have worked in this domain. It's really very important because it's a complex problem. So we wrote an API called TKPJava. Now I have a background in linguistics, and so we have a meta language of comments, and then we have an API that wraps all the ugliness that is Java, because I am not a huge fan of Java, but it's what we have, right? So that it levels it more closely for kids. And it's easier for me to just show you, which I'll do in a few minutes here. And again, Java, because that's what we have. Now in our GitHub repository, I've done exploratory work with languages that I actually use, like Python and even R. But in the US, all we have is Java. I think it's a bit actually more innovative here in Australia. I've talked to some comp sci teachers, and it seems you guys are doing more Python, which I would actually prefer. So these types of ideas can be re-implemented or implemented more fully in really almost any language. It doesn't have to be what we've done. That's one of the lessons, basically. So another thing to consider is who might be a programmer. I used to do this thing in some of my talks. I'll just kind of tell you it, but what I would start my talk with is I would tell people in the audience to close their eyes, and I would tell them to imagine a programmer in great detail, what the person looked like, what they were wearing, where they were sitting, da-da-da-da-da. And then I'd have them open their eyes and I'd say, look at me. How does this compare to what you were thinking? We need to acknowledge that this is a problem and that we need to expand who we see as programmers. It's very, very important. So TKPJava, what is it today? It has 80 coding lessons. It's a set of GitHub repositories, one with answers for teachers, one that's for students. It's a bridge to advanced placement computer science Java for the United States. It's puzzle-based. It's kind of a TDD-based kind of a thing. And it's designed to be teacher-led. Our group passionately believes that coding is social. And one of the challenges with our industry is helping to teach people who would come into our industry that it is a social industry. There are actually studies that I've cited in some of the references that professors have done that it is at the middle school that kids self-select out because of the subset of people that we currently associate with programming, kind of the lonely nerds. And I'm not saying that lonely nerds are bad. I'm actually an introvert and I kind of like programming by myself, so I'm kind of a lonely nerd, okay? But we need to be more inclusive. So the idea is that this is teacher-led and it's collaborative. So what does it look like? It's pretty simple, actually. Now we did a lot of stuff with the editor because we started with small basic. So this idea is that to build this bridge, we're going to do it through words. So we're going to have comments and we're going to have one line of English is one line of code. So I've actually done the first one, but I'll just do it again. So the way we would literally do this is we would open up this environment, and you notice there's very few buttons on here. We've customized Eclipse to make it simpler, but yet it is a full-on environment. So we would tell the kids, read the first line, and they would say, and we'd use the interrogative method to be interactive, show the tortoise. And then we would use a metaphor that they're familiar with. We would say, what is the noun in that sentence? And they'd say tortoise. And I would say, in Java, we start with the noun. So make a new line and start typing TOR. And then we would teach them tools because we want to teach not only language API, but we want to teach what it's really like to be a programmer, and we like our editors because they help us. So control space. And what we've done is we've included things that are fun for kids, like graphics in the Java docs, and Easter eggs and jokes. So we'll encourage the kids to have the great habit of reading the docs because all of us developers always read our docs, don't we? Right? So then we're going to say tortoise to autocomplete, and then we have a pick list. And what is the verb? Show. So we're using best practices so the teacher will say, great, let's just type an S. And notice we get a subset, so we're teaching the tools. And if we type an SH, it is by design that is an exact match when the kids first start. And as they go through the lesson, by design, there will be a divergence between comments and what the API is, because that is really the real world, right? But we start them off kind of easily. And then we press tab to complete. And notice we automatically put the semicolon in. So we've done some things to show the kids what is proper code and to omit some of the details so that they don't get frustrated. And then we tell them if they ask us, why is that, semicolon there? Well, that's like a period, but for Java. And then after every line, the way we've written this, they can run it and they can verify it. So that's our TDD type thing. Did it work? Yes, it worked. Fantastic. So we're going to go in here and we're going to now delete this line of comments. Now some of you are going to have strong feelings about this, so just be ready for it. We believe that the code, the API that the kids should see should be clear enough that there is no need for comments. I've actually had programmer parents come and yell at me and say, you shouldn't be teaching this. This is really bad. So anyway, so now we'd go down to line 2, not line 11, because if we said make the tortoise move fast as possible, we couldn't see that. So we have to have a verification. So we would say TOR, control space, and then we would say, what do you think it is? And the kid could guess move. And now we have parameters. So the first method did not have parameters. The second method has parameters. Subsequent methods will have multiple parameters. We have paid very careful attention to leveling. Each set of lessons has only one or two concepts that we iterate, so the kids are having fun and learning. And we have examples. And the examples you can copy and paste, but we have made the example different than the English. So if the kid's copying and pasting, notice it says 72, but the example says 50, and it's not reading the comments, not reading the requirements, because we always read the requirements all the time, right? So we're trying to teach these good habits, right? So anyway, so go here, and then now we have a 50, and now we can run this, and we can get a verification on that line, and it works, and then we can get rid of this. Now, one of the things that we saw different between events where there'd be like 5 programmers volunteering on a weekend and classrooms is that school teachers are by themselves with 20 or 30 kids. So we tried not only to build code, but also utilities for what the teachers would need. So I'm actually just going to run a recipe that one of my teachers wrote. It's a recursive square, just to get another section in here. And this was actually written by a 5th grade history teacher who, incidentally, my daughter actually taught to code, and then he's learned to code, and he's made significant contributions to the courseware library over the years. So in any case, so once that runs, we built a utility that the teachers can see for each student, and we actually encourage pairs of students, what the status is. We call this a virtual proctor. And since this is a nerd audience, this is a Google App Engine application that just pulls a blob when you have on window close and sends it up as a blob and displays it. And then we have metadata to filter by the classroom. So this is really an MVP. This is a minimum viable. But when you're a teacher and you got, 30, 40 kids, you need to understand what's the status of their situation. So it's an example of building something the teachers wanted and needed. Anyway, so you kind of get the idea. We'll look at a little bit more extensive recipe in a minute. In addition to the code, we have a philosophy around teaching. And as you'll see when we talk about the delivery methods, you can self-serve on it, and I've written a 100-page book about this that's published on the web. Or we actually have like people that will go out and teach this. And it's based on what we call social programming or programming emotional intelligence, so group work. So we have different sections of our lessons that we design to work in pairs and also in groups or mobs. Now I have to call it out because you guys are really fortunate. With me for Yao is actually the father of mob programming. Raise your hand. Woody Zool. He's actually here. I brought him with. So he's the guy that sort of taught me this, and we incorporated it into this as well. Another idea that we evolved to is normalizing girls and boys coding together. Again, this is what works for me and my organization. I know there's a lot of organizations out there that are girls only or some minority only, and that's fine and that's fantastic. But we believe strongly that we need to normalize girls, boys, minorities. Code is a normal activity, like learning to read. The courseware itself, this is how we've evolved. We have 80 lessons, and it's being used in at least 16 states in the United States and 10 countries. And it has the core concepts for building to the AP Comp Sci basics, and some kids even pass the exam, and actually some kids pass interview questions for professional programmers, some 8th graders, which is pretty exciting because you'll notice test-driven development is on the end here. And you notice we teach model view controller. I've had programmer parents come in and say, can you just come and teach model view controller to the rest of my team because they can't get it? So the first thing that we developers can do is write courseware or make courseware better for our teachers. The next thing we developers can do is work with our school teachers. So I am kind of almost crazy about this. I'll just tell you this story. This happens to be in Sweden. And you can probably guess it, the little blonde kids, they look very Swedish. I was at a conference in the US, and I was talking about teaching kids programming. And a Swedish developer was attending the conference. And he said, I'd really like to have this program in Sweden. My wife is a school teacher. She actually knows how to program. how can we do this? And just kind of by accident, I happened to be going to a city nearby 2 weeks later, and I said, okay, I will come in 2 days early, and I will come out, and I will work with you and your wife, and we will, work with the students. I will train the teachers. That's the sort of the greater point. I had another one where I was in South Africa, and some developer came up to me at the end of my talk at a tech ed, and he said, what can I do? And I said, you can get in the cab with me, because we're going to Durban right now to train school teachers. So I'm fair warning people, if you come and talk to me after this, I'll probably throw you in a cab somewhere and we'll go train some teachers, because that's what we do, right? Now, in fact, one of the reasons I'm in Australia is because I found in Melbourne that Victoria has now passed this law of requiring Comp Sci for K through 12. And I got connected with this fabulous teacher at the John Monash STEM School, Linda McIver, who has got a grant now from Google to write Python curriculum for, she's going to be training teachers in Melbourne for the entire state. And I went to dinner with her last night because that's what I do. And I take some developers from the YOW conference and I threw them in the cab and made them meet her, because that's a pattern that works. So this just getting with the teachers, the key point is with, not training the teachers because we know so much. We know one thing, we know how to program, but it's a 50-50 thing. The teachers know how to teach. I mean, again, I'm just going to be really honest. I've seen a lot of very well-meaning programmers who just suck at teaching. And the kids are like, they're super bored, right? And it makes me sad because it's a well-meaning thing. So it's with the teachers, with the school teachers. Very, very important. In fact, this is one of my school teachers. This gentleman is a math teacher. He's been teaching for 30 years in California. And he wanted to, as his legacy, before he retires, he has like 5 more years, he wanted to start a STEM academy. It's in a very challenged public school. All the sort of talented kids go off to a magnet school, so it's, a lot of them, it's English as second language, very, challenging for these kids. And he always wanted to learn to program. So he was teaching himself to program, because that's what our teachers are up against, in the US anyway, no one's helping him. He found TKP, he taught himself to program, and he started teaching. And it's now in the 3rd or 4th year. And I've been out there, I've been working with my teacher, listening to him, making materials. His name's David Cooper-Smith. He's been writing recipes. In fact, we now have this crazy idea to write Kotlin courseware for Android, because I'm kind of sick of Java. I just have to say, this is kind of a .NET crowd, so like, I want C# back, but it's not taught in the higher levels, so we're stuck with Java. So anyway, so you end up doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So just to show, this thing makes me so happy. His 8th graders, at the end of the 1st year, I went out almost on a monthly basis, and they always like challenge me, Miss Langit, we're gonna show Miss Langit that we did something. So it's really bright 8th graders. And I said, make a recipe. And so I had to abstract this a little bit. So like draw a T, draw a K. And this isn't complete, but you'll get what's going on here when I run this. These kids, they made a recipe to do this, these 8th graders. Now, look at those curves. How would you do that with this API? These are 8th graders. And then they came to a place of employment and they taught developers who've never programmed with Java with their recipe. That's what kids are capable of if we can work with our teachers. It's really, really amazing. And it's just, there's so much potential out there. How can we not do this? So drilling into each of the courses, and all the courseware is free. So I'll get into the models in just a second, but all the code's free, so you can have it, you can fork it, you can party on. There's multimodal ways of learning the concept, so methods or events or whatever. So there's this idea of a kata, which is an English question that the kids then draw on a whiteboard, just like we do at work, and then write out the steps and then code the steps. So again, this is the idea of not just typing in some code, of actually doing what we do, which is taking requirements and turning it into running software. There's a variation or a koan, which is having tests that fail and making those tests pass. There is a quiz where you have to, again, fill in values, and in code, you have to answer basically the API. It's not a paper quiz. You have to code to show you can code. There's a deep dive, extra recipes, and then we have actually paper worksheets because some teachers wanted that. So the core of what we offer is TKP Java. There's 80 lessons. It's a full year. David, for example, is teaching 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, and he's been doing it 3 years. I do have people asking me, have you worked in other age groups or domains? Separate from this, and I'm not really doing it anymore, but for about 5 years, I worked with a product called Microsoft Kodu, and it requires Windows. But it's a beautiful product that allows children to create visual worlds and stories. There is a researcher called Feline on Twitter, and she's a professor in the University of Delft, and she fascinatingly is working with middle school children and seeing how they work with programming and programming concepts. For her, one of her research areas, she analyzed tens of thousands of Scratch programs. And one of her findings, this is published, was that over half the programs didn't do anything. Like there was no button, or it was basically just beautiful worlds and conversations. So she has this very fascinating set of talks called What is Programming? And her thing to think about is we need to broaden what we think in terms of what programming is in order to get more people in, which is a little bit aside from this, but the work that I did with Kodu and visual programming really showed me that what even I thought of as programming was probably too narrow. It was really kind of interesting. So with really young kids, pre-reading. One of the cool things with Kodu right now is it works with microbits. So I just did a thing at NDC Oslo with my daughter, and it's really great for IoT. They're cheap, and they're like little mini controllers. They have accelerometers on them. Super fun, and you can do it with really young kids. In the middle age group, we built out mostly on Java. Because this is a lot of .NET people, and I've done work with Pluralsight, we did a little bit of an example with C#. We did the first module. I get tons of requests to write it more out of it, make it longer. But again, because this is a labor of love, I'm focusing only on the Java. But I always like to talk to .NET audiences. The C# is, again, out there. It's open source. If you want to do C#, fine, great, fantastic. I wish someone would do it because I think C# is a great language. And then at the older age groups, I do have high school teachers using TKP Java to supplement what kids hadn't learned earlier. In Seattle Public High Schools, we have that going on. But there's another person with whom I've collaborated, and she's actually at Yale. Her name is Katrina Owen, and some of you might even know this because I know a lot of professional programmers use it. She has a web-based platform called exorcism.io, and it's for crowdsourced code challenges. So you have the requirements, you put your code up there, you have to make the test pass, and then different people in your language track can write comments on that, and then you can update it. And she's actually justifiably quite famous. There's over 40 languages in Exorcism, so if you want to learn a new language, it's super cool. And she was actually on the cover of Wired because so many people use it. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, but it's a wonderful resource even for you guys. So the two models. This is actually an important takeaway. We struggled in our organization. We were one organization, and we were trying to do too many things. That's a very typical pattern when you've got this good intent and you're trying to solve this big problem. And almost every nonprofit that I've seen has this problem, and again, it's a huge learning. Focus on your core competency because funding is always going to be a problem with nonprofits. So what we did is we split. So teaching kids programming is part of the Mona Foundation, and really, frankly, we haven't got any funding for a while now because we've got our base courseware. I personally fund it. The idea with this is that we have a set of repositories, so code, and we have the book, and we have screencasts. So it's TKP Java, and the teachers can teach themselves. So I'll show you what that looks like. It's indexed in a website, and thanks to Microsoft, we won a community-funded grant, and I hired a UX designer because I suck at UX, and the teachers were like, I can't find anything. So we did the right thing. We A/B tested it and all that kind of stuff, because I always get this from programmers. Why isn't this GitHub? Why isn't this GitHub? Anybody can think of this? Who is the audience for this? Is it teachers? Do teachers know what GitHub is? No. So we have a GitHub, but it's like the secret GitHub. Like, you have to know what the AutoCAD is to go over there, right? And we had, oh my God, did we have fighting with that with our team? Because the programmer's like, no, they just need the code. What are you doing? Teachers want to read something. And again, the sort of meta point of this is when you want to have an impact, you need to know your audience, right? And so inside of here, you've got the very first thing is what teachers told me they want, which the programmers on the team just wanted to shoot me. Instructional design information, a bunch of writing. Because the teachers want to understand what's the underlying curriculum design before they're evaluating and selecting the curriculum. And so I worked with some teachers to write this. Now, it's not like the greatest thing in the world, but it is much more welcoming to my teachers than a GitHub repository. Again, if you're going to work in the space, just like anything else you create, make sure you sit with your consumers. It's very, very frustrating. You know, like you sit there and you're like, oh, I made my repo so friendly. It's like I got a logo and it says what to do and it's so awesome. And then the teachers are like, I don't know what that is. I know, I wouldn't use that. And you're just like, oh, I spent hundreds of hours, oh my God. You know, you really have to work with your teachers. This, you know, kind of in some ways dumb little website really put us over the top. This was what got us to 16 states. The code was already there, but nobody was using it, right? Super important, super important. So we have this, and then we have the call it the pin flip, and then we have the repos. And so we have two repos that are core, because I know you guys are nerds, so you might want to look at this. So we have the source, where you can look at the implementation of the tortoise, and you have all the answers, and you can see what we did, basically, if you'd want to do this either in you know, this language or you want to do it in another language. What's been really exciting is you can see updates from Rick Ellis. That's actually one of our students. That's another sort of theme of this. We've had students, my counterpart's son and my daughter have been doing this for 4 years, and they have become major contributors to this. They're both now 19 and in college. So, you know, you can see if I go in here, here's the implementation of logo, and, you know, you can see here's actually all the ugliness. And, you know, I have never written as many documentations in my life. Like labor of love, I went through, and this API is like, like an English teacher. But it matters, because you know what? If I misspell a comment, you know who's going to give me a pull request? I'm just saying, school teachers, right? So anyway, they will. So the free version is what we've evolved to is when someone calls me and says, oh, I want this in my school district. I say, okay. If you think your teachers can either, they know how to code or they can be comfortable teaching themselves to code, you can give them in-service days. All that stuff's free. My stuff's totally free. And they say, well, do you have teacher trainers? Do you have, ready for this? Paper manuals. That's what the teachers want, paper manuals. Do you have anything other than TKPJava? We do. We split off to a second nonprofit, started out of eventing, like having events for kids on weekends and stuff like that. It's actually on a farm in San Diego. It's really cool. We have an IoT farm. So we have water sensors in the garden, and when the kale needs watering, our industrial windmill tweets. And the kids actually came up with this. It's super cool. Anyway, so what's been happening with TKP Labs, in addition to experimentation around IoT and data science, is they are our distribution model. And so if someone says to me, I want a physical person to come out and, you know, train the teachers for X amount of time, we figured out a pricing model. It's a nonprofit, but it's, you know, sustainable, and it's like X amount per day or per whatever, and we've been having success. When we got to this point where we focused, and I was on the nerd side, basically, and then Jessica and the other team was on the teacher side. And again, I was part of the problem. That's another pattern, because I knew what teachers needed. I knew it, because I'm a smart programmer. And you know what? That's just bullshit, because I'm not a teacher, right? It's true. It's true. So the founder is often the big problem. So anyway, so this is the work that I did with David at Palm STEM Academy, and it really is, he's gone to the state assembly in California, and they're trying to make it a model for all of California. This is 8th grade class. You know, public school, super challenged kids, super fantastic teacher, working together. This is the model working, and this is something I'm just immensely proud about. So we decided that to reward the kids, this is a place I was working. This is actually the Mob, if you've heard of the Mob in San Diego. This is these cool monitors and very IoT and cool. We brought the kids out for a field trip for 3 hours. And not a, oh, let's walk through and look at the programmers and look at them. It was, no, you sit your butt down and you go on the keyboard, little 8th grader, and you start doing Node, right? And oh my God, it's the best thing ever. It's the best thing ever because these kids, again, this is David, the teacher. He's prepping them and this is gonna be so awesome. And a group of them will teach programmers from their recipes and they rotate. And a group of them will go through the interview process. I mean, I will never forget the second year, this 8th grade girl, she totally blew through all the interview questions. Like one of those just silent but deadlies, like, oh, I think I know that. I'm like, holy crap, she just did TDD, yeah. So it's wonderful, and it changes lives. One of the first kids through, he just programmed and programmed and programmed and programmed. And he's in 10th grade or 11th grade now. He got a scholarship this summer for the University of California at Riverside because of his coding, and he's going to get a full scholarship all the way there. And he's the son of immigrants. I mean, it's just, it works. It really works. This is what this kid wrote after he visited. I'm not making this up. Look at, he got the curly braces. An 8th grader. Yep. It's just, what these kids do is amazing. So, that's the model of TKP, where you get the great teacher, he does it on his own. So TKP Labs has been going all over the world. And we had this, just out of the blue thing. Our first country, of all the places in the world, where do you think our first country would be? It's the West Bank. I am not even kidding you. We sent a trainer. I had to look up. I'm I'm a stupid American. I don't even know what's there. So this is the training. One of our trainers went to the West Bank in Ramallah for 3 weeks, and he trained university students who are going to be comp sci teachers. And when he left, TKPJava is being taught in 6 middle schools in the West Bank. So I don't know how, we'll see how the internet goes, but it's just fantastic. And I don't have sounds, but it's narrated because it's a lot in Arabic. Here, let me put this. Sorry. I'm kind of just going to narrate it, I think. So they were doing IoT, and they trained, that's my guy, Justin from San Diego, and they trained the teachers, and then Justin supervised the university students training the actual students. They trained them how to be teachers. They're doing a little bit of IoT. And he's talking about the program. It's just the most amazing thing. And they're doing Squirrel. So what they came up with, because these are nerds, so we're using something called Electric Imp, which is a simplified Raspberry Pi, and it's a browser-based editor to do IoT with breadboards. You can see they're doing it there. And using the Squirrel language, which is kind of like a JavaScript. And do these kids look bored? Do they look bored? No, they look look at that. Look at their faces. They're just oh, lean in. Ooh, some more JavaScript. Yeah, right? Yeah, and I mean, it was super successful. And what a challenged area of the world as I've learned about it. And there's not enough people that know tech like every place else. And I just feel privileged to be a part of this. It's just an amazing thing. And one guy, Justin, who, by the way, did not know how to program before he joined TKP. He's an SAP trainer, and he learned, and now he's a great teacher. So anyway, there's this girl coming up here, and it'll say it in the subtitles. That seriously, I cry when I see it. It's like 1 more minute. It's really look at them. They're applauding. Look at them. They're taking pictures. Look at that. I love that. They're taking pictures of what they programmed. The joy of programming is truly universal. I mean, that's another thing I've learned in the 10 years. No matter where you go, look at those two girls. Okay, look at this, look at this, look at this right here. Okay, look at that. Look what she said. This could be my major when I go to the university. One more, yay. Anyway, so let me just get over here and over here and over here. Do. Oh, okay. All right, and as best I can tell from Google Analytics, TKP Labs gets money. So they send people. So the map is a combination. But from Google Analytics is how I get like the 16 states and the 10 countries, because I can see, and I kind of just put the major metros where it is. But we are in Australia. We are being used in Sydney. We are being used in New Zealand. We are not being used in Brisbane. I'm just saying, not that I know of. So what can we developers do? By the way, this is me and my daughter giving a talk at NDC Oslo. Number one, we can create courseware. Number two, we can work with our teachers. And this is a subtle point that I haven't mentioned, but I think it's really important. We can be visibly technical, particularly if it's unexpected. I was at Amazon reInvent a couple years ago, and this guy, Adrian Cockcroft, you might have heard of him. He made this thing called Netflix. I was stupid enough to say to him, I am so mad that there's no women on the keynote stage. And he was like, whoa, you know, he's British, right? Whoa, that's something we can correct. And the next day, I got a keynote invite to speak in Brazil. And my daughter said, when is it, so I can put it on the calendar? And it was my first keynote. And if you don't think that I was not freaking terrified to fly to a country that I didn't speak the language, and they had translators, but you know what? I did it because it's important. And this is a little bit, I don't know, harsh, but it's finding. Women in tech meetups, women in tech luncheons don't do anything. They don't do anything. Women in tech who are visible, who teach, who are technical, who commit to GitHub, who do keynotes. So I'm just saying, it's really important. And I'm trying to do next generation. My poor daughter, I said, good news for your 18th birthday is we're taking a trip to Norway. Bad news is you have to earn your trip. She's like, Mom. So in fact, you know, again, I walk my talk. I am actually in Australia, not necessarily for this, although when Bronwyn said it's a closing keynote, of course, I said I would do it. I am here to do a keynote for new work that I've been doing with Dr. Dennis Bauer, who's the lead for CSIRO bioinformatics in Australia. Because a year ago, my best friend got cancer, and I decided that it was time in my life to not work on any more bullshit Snapchat remonetizers where I make all this crappy money, great money in LA, and I just said I'm gonna work on cancer genomics, and I didn't know a darn thing about it. And I just started watching Illumina sequencing videos and trying to find great people, and the best person I found in the world is in Australia. And I'm working on her code base with her team in Scala, machine learning with Variant Spark, and we're helping them to work to make that code base ready to do important research for diseases like ALS and cancer. And when Dave from Yao said, would you like the keynote? I went, oh no, okay. And so we went and did the keynote at Yao Data at Sydney in September, and Dave said, would you like all the Yao keynotes? And I said, oh no. So I'm just telling you, being visible is very important. It's not comfortable even at this point, even though I've been speaking for so many years. I am like, ugh, but it's extremely, extremely important. I had students come up to me, both men and women students, and say, because you talk about this, because you talk about lifelong learning, because you talk about technical people working with non-technical people, whether it's students or bioinformaticians, I see this path forward. And I think that it is not only an education, It actually goes beyond educating. It goes into things like bioinformatics. That's why I'm doing it. With all the IoT and all the genomic sequencing, we who have experience really need to be part of this because this is shaping our world. I think because I come from California, I actually kind of see it sooner, and we need to continue to learn and continue to educate, work with our teachers, prepare our kids, because the world is getting so much around so much information, data everywhere, IoT everywhere, and our kids aren't ready. Our kids are not ready. And so the big message from this is to work with the teachers, create the courseware, and when they call you to do the keynote, Bronwyn should be smiling because they have a whole bunch of keynote people now for next year, you need to say yes. Oh, and by the way, if you go to YOW, you can get 15% off. So yay, you can get 15% off, a little promo thing. So that's basically what I have to say. I hope it was useful. You know, it's obviously something I care deeply about, and you can make such a big difference in so many people's lives. And maybe some of these things I've learned will be helpful for you. I hope so. So anyway, I know you guys want to go drinking, so that's all I have to say. So thank you.